Compañeros, welcome to another edition of the SQL Data Partners Podcast. This is episode 262.
Time travel.
Yeah. We've gone into the future.
We retconned all the previous episodes, realized they're not very good.
No, it was just a wraparound, right? We used like TinyInt, and we hit like once we hit 265, it just wrapped back over in terms of episodes.
All right, long-term listeners, do you remember the episode that doesn't exist? That's what happened. That's when the split occurred.
Oh man, I have to minor tangent. There's an amazing board game called Spirit Island, and think of it like you're playing the spirits of the island and you're destroying the evil colonialists and all this stuff. And there's one spirit, I forget the name, but it's like the spirit of the days that never were. And you can literally just isolate certain parts of the island and be like, all right, you don't exist right now. So I feel like, that's what maybe happened.
There we go. It never happened. Okay, so episode 262, and Eugene has referenced it online if you've been following his stuff, and his journey about learning Azure Synapse. Now we have a part one. That was so surprising me. I wasn't quite sure. I guess are we doing this again? I don't know. Maybe we'll like down the road, right?
Yeah, we'll find out in 6 months if I've learned anything. I mean, for the blog post, I am hoping to do another post about, okay, if you are going to teach on Azure Synapse, what can you do to do it effectively? So maybe that's that. We'll see.
I just thought, I forgot I was going to invite Greg to this, and I didn't do it. Dang it. Sorry, Greg. Okay, so
hate to break it to you like this.
Yeah, the episode for today's, the show notes for today's episode is going to be SQLDataPartners.com/Azure Synapse or SQLDataPartners.com/262. So yeah, what we, as I mentioned, what we want to talk about is Eugene's going to take us through a little bit of the journey in terms of wrapping his head around Azure Synapse and kind of the coming at it from a different angle, right? He's kind of come from the administrator, developer type, and and then kind of hitting it that way, and why it's been a challenge. So before we get into that, I want to give a couple of shout outs.
It's a long list.
Yeah. Hey, the list is getting long. People like to interact with us on social media. We've got friends in all kinds of different places. Okay, so here, Cesar Oviedo, Sarita Coda, Tennis Malo, Fabio Bragnaca, Carla Zeigel, Rob Wagner, Jeremy Bijo. Assuming that there's some accents there, so I'm assuming that's French, and you'll forgive me. Maria Laura Colatoni, Teddy Wolderoff, Hunter.
At this point, I think half the names are fake, and people are just trolling you, Carlos.
Well, they've got accounts, so that is possible. I have to ask Amanda to start, verifying these.
Have a little captcha. Like, I swear I'm not a robot. I'm not a troll.
Yeah, exactly. Jose Lopez Portillo. I have met Jose, so I know that, or he goes by ES. So I know he's a real person. Rick Ellis, Paul Clay, Fernando Ventias, Jamie Mora, Rodian Shiryev, Vino Nagu, Julio Cesar Danilo Jr., Lou Tercera, Porto, Fernando Cifuentes, who connected with me on LinkedIn, and I will respond shortly. Luis Dominiason, Carl Coldamore, David Vasquez, Palestino, Mazan Abdulaftif, Jose Burgos Gonzalez, Fernando Sierra, Ricardo Garcia, Samrowit Munchi, Felipe Gaitan, and Sean Maloney, who we had on our previous episode. Okay, so very good. So whether to real or imagined interactors with us on social media, no, we know we hope you're all real people. And wherever you are, that you are well. So with that, we will link to Eugene's blog post.
Yep.
And again, as he's mentioned in the past, He said 2023 is going to be the year of Azure Synapse.
Azure Synapse. Yep.
And he got to chapter 1 and he's like, whoa.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, man, I think one of the challenges, and this doesn't even have to do with Azure Synapse, but just like working as a consultant in general, you run into the problem that a lot of times if you want to learn something, you have two choices. You either find a customer that needs that thing done, and then the fork in the road is either you give them a discount for your learning on the job, or you don't tell them that you're learning on the job and just hope that you can wing it enough to learn it, right? And so it's like, okay, yeah, so, I mean, I could go to Carlos and be like, Carlos, we need to find a customer who needs an Azure Synapse project. Like, we could try that. But otherwise, what you have to do is you just kind of have to dive into it. And so it's just kind of unmoored or ungrounded. Whereas at my last job,
and I do feel like we have to say, you'll forgive me, Eugene, for all the current customers that Eugene's working with.
We would never do
BI.
that. We would never learn on the job. Come on.
Yeah, I've never learned a thing in my life. I refuse to learn.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Like in my last job, all the stuff I was learning was because there were specific problems that came up, right? But this is me trying to future-proof my career, especially because one of the motivations is if you look from the outside at the Microsoft org chart, you'll notice that the Synapse team just seems to have like a net and a dart gun, and they keep stealing all the Power BI people, right? Oh. Yeah, so you'll look at like the management level kind of stuff going on, and just over the past couple of years, people from Power BI have been moving over to the Synapse org chart. Now it's all under the broader, higher level org chart and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But clearly something is going on there. And I think, part of it is Power BI has been very successful. And part of it is the approach where it's like, hey, we're putting out updates every month. We're doing all these things. And, the Synapse product has at times had a challenge with keeping up with changes. I remember last year, I attended 2 pre-cons on Synapse at SQL Bits, and there was this whole thing about how at the time Synapse didn't support what's called Delta Lake, which is basically a sub format of a file format, right? It's a way to take Parquet column compressed files and say, how we got rid of all of that ACID compliance transactional support? Well, we're bringing it back, baby. We're gonna kludge it in.
And so turns out people really like it. Yeah.
Yeah. Turns out being able to delete stuff, good idea. Who would have thought, right? And so not having that support was a big deal. And my understanding is that Synapse has it now, but they were lagging behind. And so,
sure. Well, and in its defense, right? So Synapse has I suppose Burgoynian, technologies. It kind of had a what am I?
Yes.
Right. Kind of like what problem am I trying to solve? Right. Because it kind of first started out as like, oh, I'm SSAS in the cloud.
Yeah. Not quite. Azure Synapse Analytics started out as Azure SQL Data Warehouse.
Yep.
Which wasn't analysis services in the cloud. It was modern data warehousing. Specifically, it was massive parallel processing of SQL databases. So similar to PDW and APS. Actually, that was the impetus behind how we got to the cloud version, that people couldn't afford PDW, parallel data warehouse, or APS, whatever extremely expensive thing I can't even think about forwarding, much less caring about.
Yeah.
Sure.
So nobody bought those products because it cost a whole lot of money. So the idea was, okay, well, how about we put it in a cloud and have it available at a lower cost? It's still a high-priced product. It's still one of the highest-priced products in the Azure ecosystem. But it's a lot less than spending several $1 million on hardware specialized for running this solution.
Right.
And so I can write queries. I can have them distributed across a large number of installations of this product. And my developers and end users just think of it as a database, when really it's splitting your data out, segregating it up to 60 separate machines, and having those machines all work on the problem concurrently, resolve a solution back to a main node, and having that main node send a response back to us.
Now, Kevin, do you remember the on-prem solution? Was that a shared nothing architecture?
So the on-prem solution, as my understanding, because again, I've never seen one of these in person.
We don't know if they're real, right?
No, I know they're real. Mala has confirmed that she has seen one in person before.
Why didn't we get Mala? Okay.
Right. So Mala is an expert on this.
Right.
She has confirmed physical existence of this thing, but it was an appliance that you would purchase. There was a lot of different servers that were interconnected together. And the original basis was distributing T-SQL. Then it became a combination of SQL and the Hadoop distributed file system, which also is where the Polybase project came into existence. And so Azure SQL Data Warehouse has this long-standing combination with Hadoop, combination with modern data warehousing, combination with Polybase that came into being, but didn't get a whole lot of traction, or at least as much traction as I think they wanted.
Right.
Because it's an expensive product. It's a different set of what you can do in T-SQL. The way you design tables is different. It is tailored for warehouses. So it is tailored for fact and dimensional Kimball-style warehousing, but there are different rules on indexing, on distribution. And it's intended for billions, trillions of rows, not 200,000 rows.
Right.
Yeah. So, going back to Carlos's thing, a part of the big challenge, right, is they started out as trying to build this specialty tool, right? So it's like, okay, we need something that can it's a chainsaw and it can cut down trees. And then people were like, yeah, but I also want a way to cut my bread. Can you cut, right? Like the needs and the tooling needs have shifted. And so one of the things that you end up with this weird issue is you end up with this really awkward Swiss Army knife where you have a chainsaw strapped to a butter knife, right? Like I kind of described that in the blog post, but you really do get that when you think about dedicated SQL pools versus serverless SQL, right? Yes, they both run SQL at the end of the day, but they're diametrically opposed, right?
Yep.
Sure.
Because the one is you're paying for capacity, you're keeping it on. It's super expensive, but it can handle huge amounts of compute, huge amounts of data processing if the data's in the right shape. Whereas serverless SQL, from my understanding, is the exact opposite. It's, well, we've got some flat files in a data lake, and I'd love to be able to run SQL queries against it because that's what I know. So let's just slap a schema on it whenever we read it. And if it takes me 30 minutes, fine, I don't care, right?
Sure.
And it's stupid cheap because you're just paying for the storage and the incremental compute, right? So you really do have this issue where they've tied together a chainsaw and a butter knife. It's insane, right? Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah. So providing the commentary track on this.
Yes, please.
I mean, this is almost a commentary track. So what we were describing before was rebranded as the Azure Synapse Analytics dedicated SQL pool. So Azure SQL Data Warehouse became this dedicated SQL pool. Like Eugene mentioned, that is dedicated. It is physical hardware that is available in some data center, that you have data that is resident capacity on there. You have some amount of compute that is regularly granted to you.
Yep.
Then the serverless SQL pool is not a SQL Server installation, even a cousin of a SQL Server installation. It's really a set of microservices that exist that take a T-SQL query, parse it, and then execute it over a flat file structure in Azure Blob Storage or Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2. And the cost on that one, it's not even incremental compute. It is $5 per terabyte of data processed.
Okay.
So it's all storage. Now, terabyte of data processed has several separate meanings of what's included in processing data, because if you have to write to a temp table and then read from a temp table, that data has been processed 3 times. Once to read it from the flat file, once to write it to the temp table, once to read it from the temp table. So what it does is it does focus the mind and force you to write specific queries, get down to just the data you need. And there are some tricks that you can follow to structure your data in folders in a way that you automatically filter out a lot of what you don't need. So it is two radically different tools for the task, but those are two separate jobs that are both constituted in what we think of as modern data warehousing, and in what in the Databricks world they're calling the data lakehouse,
right?
Which drove a lot of this Synapse movement over the past couple of years out of we're a massive parallel processing Hive competitor to we're a data lakehouse competitor.
Yeah. It feels, as an outsider, it feels so much like the tool and the product is defined in opposition to what it is. Like I took film theory as an honors course in college. That's not a flex. It was just one of the ones that was available. And we had different types of film theory, and one of them was called, I think, structuralism, where the idea is that sometimes something is defined in opposition to something else, right? And so, like, you know, a bird might be defined in opposition to man, or in opposition to the ground, or in opposition to a snake, or whatever. And it feels so much like Azure Synapse is, oh, we have Hadoop at home, or oh, we have Spark at home, or whatever. And from a technical standpoint, I appreciate that, right? Because they understand where the puck is moving, so to speak. But from a communication standpoint, it's very difficult because it assumes you're already deeply ingrained in that technology, right? Like I ran into the same issue with Apache Kafka, because I did a course on, KSQL for Apache Kafka. I'm sure Kevin could expound upon that, but think of it as we created an event streaming software, just like Azure Event Hubs. And then we found a way to apply a SQL layer on top of it and even pretend to have tables that we can use as references, even though the underlying part is constantly flowing, constantly changing. But if you've never used Kafka a day in your life, then most of the information on KSQL is a nightmare because it all uses the words and the assumptions of the underlying technology. Same thing with Synapse. If you've never used Spark or Databricks, like a lot of it's like, well, why do I care? You know?
Sure. So now I guess to jump in, right? Because it's so well, and I suppose notebooks are gaining, some traction a little bit, right? But that's one of the ones I know that has been a little bit of a struggle now. Like all of a sudden I have to manage, these notebooks, and it's like, okay, so and the way you go about building things, right? So am I starting in the Databricks side, right, or do I start in the data lake, the storage side? Right, that can be challenging as well.
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge is there's a wide area and you have to be conversant in a lot of it before the pieces start making sense. We could talk about, here is a serverless SQL pool, and I think that is by itself contained well enough that you can get started and start to get a feeling for, oh, okay, I understand where the benefit of this is. And it's not unique to Azure. So in Azure, you do have the serverless SQL pool in Azure Synapse Analytics. In AWS, you've got Athena. GCP, you might have something, but I have never cared about GCP, and you would have to pay me to care. Nonetheless, this is a fairly common pattern. And okay, now we could talk about data lakes. We could talk about querying over data lakes. But then you start asking, well, why do I even care about a data lake? Why, especially if I have data in relational databases already? Why am I taking this data out of a relational database to put it into a data lake to pretend I have a relational database to query it from?
Yeah, it's like what secondary index hurt you when you were a child that you've decided that, okay, we're getting rid of all of this performance structure and we're going to rebuild it from the ground up by using folder hierarchies? Why are we reproducing indexes by using folder names? It's just mad, And
right, and then somebody like me can come in and calmly explain to you why this is beneficial, what the benefits are, and also that no, there is still a need for that relational database, because for the query patterns that relational databases solve, they are still the best in the world at the job. But that there are other query patterns which are not great for relational databases, and there are data sets that are not great for relational databases, and the combination of those two make a data lake beneficial. And then now we're at a point where the lakehouse mantra is okay, so we've had a warehouse, we've got this data lake, but now we're having to maintain two separate things. And especially people who are loading their warehouses from data lakes, could we not just have the data lake and then abstract on a warehouse on top of it and get the benefits of that relational database while not having to perform all of the ETL of moving data back and forth between systems? And that's a challenge. I think we're still a couple of years away from it really being at a point where I think it's realistic. We're seeing Databricks, we're seeing Microsoft, we're seeing Snowflake. Those are generally the three major players in this world. We are seeing them put a lot of R&D into trying to make this a viable solution. Performance is always going to be the biggest problem. And I don't think they've gotten to a point yet in any of their systems where you can realistically expect the type of performance that you would consider reasonable for a relational data warehouse.
Yeah, and so I'll tell you what one of the light bulb moments were for me. Well, I guess first back to what you said. Yeah, the data lakehouse makes more sense when you accept that, okay, we are committed to using a data lake. Now, how do we deduplicate effort? Coming into it, when you haven't been sold yet on the value of a data lake, it looks like you're reinventing the wheel, right? Just another phase in like, we've had data warehouses for 30 years. Why did we do this like 3 lefts to make a right turn? But a light bulb moment for me, it's funny. I can see here in our chat the Big Data is Dead article. So we'll have to put that in the show notes again.
Sure.
But reading that and just realizing that you have a lot of things that are based on an axis of time. But then in addition to that, what's the working data set that a lot of analyses need? And, with the SQL Data Partners stuff, I'm used to smaller businesses. We're just dealing with a single transactional database. But there are times where you're dealing with like exports from an ERP system or dumps from an API done weekly or whatever. And that's where it started to make more sense for me is there was this mismatch of, okay, we've all attended the session from like 10 years ago about the 5 V's of big data and like velocity, veracity, volume, whatever. And it's like
vivacity.
Yeah. Verisimilitude. None of my customers are dealing with that. None of them, right? But there's a spot in between, right? It's not this giant ocean of unstructured data, but it's like the river delta, right? Where things get wider and messier. And having some way where I can take all of those like CSV extracts and my transactional data and combine them seamlessly, like that's interesting, right? As opposed to having to write a bespoke ETL integration to import it into my SQL database for every single one, and to make sure I know the schema 100% ahead of time, right?
And I will say, so in that case, that's actually where we see a lot of folks gaining interest because they have these SaaS apps that they can't tie into.
Yes.
So what they get and
they have to pull it out
is CSV exports, right? And it's like, okay, well now I have to do reporting off of that, right? And I want to tie into what I've got, or whatever, right? Like, yeah, and that seems to be kind of a driver of a lot of at least the questions for us from our side.
Yeah, sure. And those integration points, that becomes one of the driving forces behind a data lake, but also different structures of data, different demands for data, and getting results faster. That I can have the conversations with you on how to design a Kimball-style data warehouse, but we're going to need a dimensional bus diagram. We're going to need to get conformity across all the business units. We're going to need to understand what exactly is a customer and what attributes make up a customer, and realize that the marketing department's version of a customer is different from the sales department's version of a customer, but we need to get a word that means the same thing for both of these organizational units, and yada, yada. And then somebody comes in, oh, now I need a report on whatever. And all right, that'll be 3 months. Versus, I need that report. Can I get it back like tomorrow.
Sure. Well, I still think that there's I think Azure or the Synapse group would like us to think that can happen, but I still think you have to have somebody with kind of this specialized, I shouldn't say specialized, broader knowledge, right, to be able to make that happen.
Yeah, for sure. Because
it's still a struggle, right, to just be able to jump in and because it's not quite Power BI yet, or at least it's like I am in an interface that I'm familiar with, and I can kind of pull shoot this through and kind of hack at it, right? You can get lost really quickly in
frankly, without expertise, you're just going to get your data faster but wrong.
Right.
So, you'll get bad answers faster, which sometimes is okay, but for the most part, you do need to have that baseline of knowledge, that organizational understanding, and you're still going to have the same types of challenges that the Kimball style modelers have.
Sure.
It's just a question of when are you having that challenge and to what extent are you having the challenge? Because for that classic warehouse, I've got one chance and I got to do it right. Or I'm going to build data marts for different organizational units, but then combine them together into my mega warehouse like Voltron. But again, I need to know where all those pieces connect.
Right.
That data lake understanding is I call it more pragmatic understanding that, look, people are going to have different thoughts. They're going to change their minds. They're going to want something and then say, actually, I really want this other thing instead. And so finding ways to reduce the friction of making a change does help you over time. And frankly, where the data lake helps there is, all right, well, instead of having to structure out tables and redo ETL jobs, cool, I'm going to create a new file format or create a new folder structure and then just dump some files in there. And have something that essentially writes a query or shapes that data, puts it in there, and people can try it out. If they don't like it, then all right, we'll move on to the next step.
Well, and that's a really good point, because it was funny. I made a Reddit account for work, which is a sentence I never thought I'd say. I've been answering questions and stuff on there, and someone's like, "Oh, is like GPT gonna like take our jobs as BI professionals?" And I'm like,
No.
I
will rant hard on that.
No, I know. But there's like the Ford quote that I don't think he actually said, where it's like, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, right? And that's business intelligence in a nutshell. It is the most iterative job I've ever seen. You ask people what they want, and it's not what they want. And I think, having a data infrastructure that acknowledges that fact is a big selling point, right? Mm. Because SQL Server can be amazingly be performant when tuned. But if you're like actively and dynamically changing columns, like it's a pain. It really is, right? It's not great for experimentation. It's great for optimization,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Right. So I guess so maybe just to circle back on the right. So where do you feel like you've gotten to this point? And then, right, we talked about the 6 months out, right? So
yeah,
feels like the lay of the land is coming together, right, a little bit. Now, is this like now you're kind of just focusing on execution and building out some of these pieces, or what's kind of next steps there for your?
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, a lot of it has been kind of lay of the land. I think right now. This is going to be a weird analogy, but that's what I specialize in. Have you ever played like GeoGuessr or any of those things where it's a web game? Mm. They drop you somewhere on Google Maps in like person view, and you have no idea where you're at, but you can walk in Google Maps, and you have to figure out what city and state you're in, right? Or even what country, right?
Interesting.
And so there might be like something in like Nordic or Swedish, and you're like, well, I think I know what country I'm in. My spouse loved that sort of game. I feel like I know what country I'm in. I maybe even know what state I'm in, but I'm still playing the GeoGuessr game where I'm trying to find the closest airport, right?
Yeah, Jim.
And so I want to do a little bit more like getting oriented. And then I think the next step is I need to start getting my hands dirty and just spin up a lab and start going through some of the exercises and that kind of stuff. But I think I can get to by the end of the year where I can give my first presentation on it, but it's still in general, I feel like it's a year to be able to present on it and another year to be able to consult on it is where I'm at. So we're on schedule, but I'm still fairly befuddled.
Sure. Okay.
We haven't talked about Spark.
Yeah. That's what part 2 is, right?
There we go. The rest of the story, because Azure Synapse Analytics is a lot more than just these dedicated SQL pool and the serverless SQL pool.
Yes.
Sure.
We could even talk about Data Explorer pools. Carlos doesn't want to talk about Data Explorer pools.
Oh my goodness. Well, like when I was writing that blog post, I'm like, okay, here's the 3 main data compute engines, and then I'm like, oh wait, there's a 4th one, but I don't know if that counts. I'm just gonna put in some state. I'm gonna put in some weasel words so no one like well actually me's and just move on is what I ended up doing.
I did well actually him.
Yeah, I know. There's no one's safe from Kevin and his fact correction. But yeah, no, I feel
that's why listeners of the podcast come. Right?
I know
the hard facts from Kevin.
I know. No, I feel like I'm getting closer. I really do.
Okay, well, very good. Then I guess, we'll circle back in 6 months, episode 600, we'll circle back and kind of figure out where we are and what new services have been added by then, right? I'm sure because it's ever changing. Okay, well, very good. So, interesting. Now, compañeros, if you are learning new technology or something that you're dealing with and I want to talk about it, let us know. Right, we'd love to have you on. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and we'll get you scheduled. We'll get you connected with Amanda and bring you on. Now, as always, compañeros, if you want to connect with us, you can do so in the following ways, Mr. Eugene.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. You can also find me on TikTok at SQLgene, and I just posted a video of me busting out of a closet to tell you the secrets Big Dax doesn't want you to know. So go check that out. Funny. Yeah.
I knew Kevin was in good spirits when I saw his video. I'm like, Eugene.
Eugene. Yeah, right.
I'd already moved on to Kevin. And
I get it. It's fine.
We hope Kevin starts feeling better.
Yeah, I hope that I come up with something on the spot now because I just blanked once Eugene
you can find Kevin in
in
my TikTok videos. So if you actually zoom in, you'll see him behind me in it. It's amazing.
I do photobomb people extremely well. But you can find me. I'm going to say you can find me in a Data Explorer pool because I don't think anybody's ever opened up one of those.
Yeah, that checks out.
I joke. I actually have a talk on Data Explorer pools. I don't hate them. I kind of like them.
That's funny.
There we go.
I don't want to have to learn another querying language, though. Please tell me Kusta's not that bad.
It's not that bad, but it is different. Now, if you've worked with Splunk, if you ever worked with the Splunk language, that's what it's kind of very much like.
Fair enough. Okay.
Compañeros, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm at Carlos El Chacon. Thanks again for tuning in to today's episode. Eugene, we're all reading for you on your road to Azure Synapse.
Appreciate it.
And we'll look forward to,
or at least a content creator, the mega superstar of TikTok.
Oh yeah, no, I'm gonna be monetized on every channel by the end of the year. Just you wait.
Yeah, that's right. You'll have so much TikTok money you won't know what to do with yourself, right?
Yeah, I'm just gonna so many dance challenges.
Thanks again, compañeros. We'll see you on the SQL Trail.
SQL Data Partners.